Okay, let's do this. If you are unfamiliar with who I am, and many of you may be, and of course that's okay, my name is Brad Miller. So today I want to talk to you about a course that I am going to be teaching at IPAC EDU. So the course that I'm going to be teaching, we're going to start here in a couple of weeks. It is called Literature as Resistance. And the purpose of today's video is to give you a little bit of a taste of what we're going to cover in the course. But before I do that, I want to talk for just a moment about what IPAC EDU is. So IPAC EDU is an online learning community for adults that are that want to engage in certain educational pursuits according to the interests that they have in a fun and interactive way. So again, it's an online learning community. There are a lot of courses that are offered at IPAC EDU about a variety of topics. There's something there for everybody. So I will put the link to IPAC EDU in the description, along with the page that is specific to the course that I am going to teach. You can go there, you can check out my course, but you can also just check out IPAC EDU, see the catalog of all the courses that are being offered, because there might be something else that piques your interest that you may want to check out. So anyway, so IPAC EDU, it's an acronym, IPAK-EDU. The IPAK stands for the Institute for Pure and Applied Knowledge. The educational arm of that is this online community that I think you should probably know a little bit more about. So what's my experience with IPAC EDU? Well, I do know the guy who started it, Dr. James Lyons Weiler, who's a friend of mine, but also I've been working with him a little bit at IPAC EDU for the past couple of years. I have been both an instructor and a student for courses at IPAC EDU, and I believe that I have been an instructor or a co-instructor for 4 courses. This one that I'll be teaching will be my 5th course, and the second of this particular course, the second iteration of this particular course. But I've also been a student. So, yeah, I'm a big fan of IPAC EDU, and I think that it's necessary for us to find people that are like-minded. And when I say like-minded, I don't necessarily mean people who have the exact same opinions that you do. But what I do mean is people who feel the same in terms of wanting to learn, wanting to grow, um, curious, seeking truth, wanting to understand how our world works, and wanting to do so in an environment that places a premium on truth, reality, knowledge, and is not necessarily worried about some of the other baggage that you could get at, a lot of universities these days, or having to deal with censorship, etc. So anyway, so I'm a big fan of IPAC EDU. But let's talk about my course. So the course that I am going to teach is called Literature as Resistance. I have taught it before. I taught it about 2 years ago. So this will be the second iteration of the course. It's going to be the same course that I taught before, but I do believe that it is going to be an updated and improved version of that course. Now, I call it Literature's Resistance. There's actually a longer title. So the full title of the course is Literature as Resistance. And then the subtitle is Recognizing, Unmasking, and Countering Totalitarian Tendencies. And it is a reading course. So I would say that it's kind of a book club for people of action. So in this course, yeah, we're going to read some literature, but we're not just reading for reading's sake. There is a purpose for what we're going to read. There is a purpose for doing the reading, for engaging in the discussions. So it's still action oriented. The literature that we're going to read is a vehicle for us to basically develop an interpretive lens through which we can better analyze and thus understand our world. So I'm going to read a little bit here from the course description that I have on the IPAC EDU website. And again, I will put the link in the description so you can go check out this course description yourself, because I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'm going to read a couple of parts of it. So it says here, discover how literature reveals and contemplates totalitarian trends, exploring themes like technocracy, scientific dictatorship, narrative control, and how certain technological innovations, such as AI, could be used to increase societal control measures. Study classics like George Orwell's 1984, Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, and Yevgeny Zamyatin's We, alongside contemporary nonfiction such as David A. Hughes' COVID-19 Psychological Operations and the War for Technocracy, and other relevant supplemental material. And then I'm going to skip down a little bit here, but like I say, you can go read this course description in its entirety once I give you the link. But I have thrown in here just some of the themes of the course that we're going to talk about. And so the course description says, throughout the course, we will use the literary texts to examine themes within technocratic/dictatorial systems, such as 1, control of information to influence behavior. 2, elevation of knowledge, science, technology in a scientific class. 3, promotion of the materialist paradigm. 4, separation of man from God or the transcendent. 5, atomization of individuals and assimilation into a societal mass. 6, the resistance to influence from systems of control. Okay, I'm going to stop right there. So those kind of 6 lines that I just mentioned there, those are some of the themes that we're going to discuss. So what does it mean to be in a technocratic system? What does it mean to be in a system that seeks to control information and influence your behavior, or that elevates above all science? And, you know, we've heard over the last couple of years, people even use the term scientism. Well, what does that mean? What does that mean to worship at the altar of science, as some people have said? What does it mean to promote this materialist paradigm at the exclusion of all else, or to try and separate man from God, or from the transcendent in general, or to separate people from their identity, from their history, from their family, from their neighbors, and to atomize everybody into just individuals? You know, what exactly does that mean? And how do we learn to recognize these tendencies today, and perhaps even come up with ideas as to how we can resist, how we can retain our own sovereignty, our own independence, etc.? So some of that is that's kind of what we're going to explore now. And I already mentioned there in the course description some of the books that we're going to read. I will talk about those more in depth here in just a moment. But let me tell you what the course is not. So this course is not something that you should be intimidated about. Maybe you might say, hey, I'm not a big reader. Doesn't matter. Okay. There's no homework. There are no tests. This is just us coming together. Like I said, it's kind of book club for people of action. So we're going to read, we're going to discuss. There will be some guided presentations, but more than anything, the way that I run my classes is as a kind of a guided dialogue. There will be themes and the things that I want to present in each lesson, but the way that we will do that is just via dialogue. Very informal discussions, very it's kind of a conversation. That's the way that I like to run my classes, and that's how we're going to do it. So take away any intimidation that you might feel. Maybe it's been a while since you've read these books, and maybe you've never read any of them, or maybe you have read them, but it's been a long time. It doesn't matter. You know, if you are interested and you understand the importance of discussing these themes, and you would like to participate in very informal discussions with other individuals who understand the importance of these themes, then this course may be for you. It is a reading class. Okay, we're not reading literature just for reading's sake. As I said before, the reading is a vehicle for us to glean some insights, inform our worldview, sharpen our analytical skills, and we do that so that we can better understand our own world. So can we read these books and find some analogs in these texts that then we can use to better understand our own contemporary world? All right. Now, the other thing that we'll do is we'll as we go through the course, and we're going to hold the course weekly. So I'll go ahead and tell you the course will run. We're going to start September 23rd. So in a couple of weeks, the course will run. It will run weekly. So every Tuesday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern, we will hold class. Class will be about 90 minutes. All the classes will be conducted via Zoom, and they will all be recorded. So if you miss a class, it doesn't matter because you will get access to the recording. So you'll just be able to listen to it and catch back up. It'll be as if you never mentioned it. Or if there are things that you maybe have to leave class early, or there are things in a class that you didn't understand, you will be able to go back and listen to the recording again to see if maybe you pick it up when you listen the second time. So it doesn't necessarily matter how much you can or can't commit because the classes will be recorded. So if you're going to miss some of the classes, maybe that's not necessarily as big of a concern as it otherwise might be. Here's the other thing. We're going to read 5 books in this class. I'll tell you that up front. If you choose to read nothing, if you choose to do 0 reading, first of all, that is your prerogative. That's completely okay. So don't feel intimidated. You may say, hey, listen, I'm a really busy person. I got a lot going on. This sounds very interesting. I just don't know how much I can read. If you choose to read 0 and you come to class and you participate, I promise you will still take a lot from this course. Now, I don't recommend that you do that. I think you should do some of the reading. But I'm just telling you, even if you chose to read nothing, first of all, you're still welcome to come to the class. You're still welcome to participate. No, because you didn't read doesn't mean that you can only listen in, but you're not allowed to participate. No. It's I'm not going to ask who did their reading from week to week. It's not that kind of course. My point here is that even if you chose to do 0 reading, you would still take a lot from this course and you would still be welcome in every single class. But I don't recommend that you do that. I recommend that you try to do the readings along with us so that you are better able to engage in the discussions, and then you will just take that much more from the course. I'm just telling you that I think the course will be useful enough that even if you did no reading, you would still take a lot from it. But of course, I encourage you to do as much of the reading as you can. Also, we'll set up a chat group, maybe on the Telegram app or wherever, but we will set up a chat group so people can kind of participate in. We can share things with each other in between the classes. So if you're reading and you have a question, maybe you can pop it in the chat group and see if others maybe have the same question, or maybe somebody has some insights that you didn't think of. You may find an article that you think is interesting that kind of deals with some of what we're talking about in the class. You may choose to share the link. So just stuff like that we have found can be quite helpful throughout the length of the course, is just kind of having this informal chat group to share stuff in between the actual weekly classes. Here's the other thing. Nobody cares about your political affiliation. You don't have to worry about whether or not you have the same opinions as me or anybody else in the class. It doesn't matter. You can agree with others in the course. You can disagree. No problem. I'm certainly hoping for some good, engaging discussions. And sometimes the best discussions arise from a little bit of healthy disagreement. So don't worry about that. Nobody cares about your political bent or whatever. Doesn't matter. All right, what are we going to read? We're going to read dystopian literature. Okay, that's kind of what the course is predicated upon. We are going to read some of the books that are kind of considered to be within the accepted, canon, so to speak, of dystopian literature. So in doing that, some of the first things that we're going to do in the opening lessons of the course is, well, let's define what a dystopia is, what dystopian fiction is, right? Let's define what a technocracy is, or what is meant by the term scientific dictatorship. What's the difference between dystopian and totalitarian? We'll kind of set the stage by just discussing some of these themes before we even get into the actual books. I said a minute ago, we're going to read 5 books. We are not going to read them in chronological order by publication date. The way in which I have kind of mapped out the course is that we are going to start by reading the book that is the most well known, the one that the majority of people, if they have read any of these books, they probably read, right? Or the one that has kind of the most presence just in our cultural milieu, and that is 1984. All right. So we'll start with that one, and then we'll kind of move through the other books. Now, if you've read, for example, 1984 before, great. Maybe it's been 20 or 25 years since you read it. Maybe you don't remember that much, or maybe you read it recently, or maybe you've never read it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. 1984. So, first of all, so here we are, 1984. All right. Why are we reading this first? Because George Orwell's 1984 is the granddaddy of dystopian literature. Okay. And even as I say the granddaddy, I should also say the big brother. Remember, the term big brother, as in big brother is watching you, comes from 1984. So the term thought crime. So there are these ideas that come from 1984 that just exist in our cultural milieu. George Orwell's name, first of all, it's not his real name. It's a pen name. His real name is Eric Blair. But anyway, his name has come to be used as this descriptor for something that is, I mean, it's almost become a synonym for dystopian, you know? If you say that something is Orwellian, people have come to know what you mean by that. A couple years ago, kind of in the wake of everything that was happening with all the COVID nonsense, there was a meme out there. Many of you probably saw it. There was a meme out there that said, "Make Orwell fiction again," which is it's a funny, clever meme. But what is the idea behind the meme? Why does that even need to be said? What's kind of the driving concept behind that meme? What about Orwell do we want to make fiction again, and why? Well, that's because people know about George Orwell. Now, as I say that, if all you know about George Orwell is Big Brother or thought crime or the word Orwellian, and you have a vague idea of what that may mean if someone uses that term, then maybe you should read the book with us, because there is a lot more to 1984 than just that. But anyway, 1984, George Orwell. So published in 1949. This is and this is important because there are some professors of literature that say, hey, when you're going to read a book, don't worry so much about the author. Let the narrative of the novel stand on its own. And first of all, I'm not a professor of literature here, but listen, when I go through this course with everybody, I am a student of the course too. Let me just put that out there. But anyway, my point is, I don't necessarily disagree with that. But in this course, we are going to discuss the authors. We will situate the authors in place and time. And what I mean by that is we will spend just a little bit of time as an introduction to each novel discussing the historical and geographical context of the authors so we can better understand their potential motivations for having written 1984 or Brave New World, etc. Why? Well, this is one of the overarching questions that we are going to consider at various points throughout the novel. Why did such and such author write this book? Okay, for example, why did Orwell write 1984? Or why did Aldous Huxley write Brave New World? Is it a warning? Is it to tell us, hey, if things continue the way they've been going, this is what could happen? Is it just a piece of entertaining fiction? Is there a predictive programming element to it? Is it a combination of various motivations? Maybe it's different depending on which author and which book we're talking about. But these are questions that we are going to ask at various points throughout the course. So for us, we are going to spend just a little bit of time talking about each of these authors. Anyway, so George Orwell, obviously very known for 1984, also known for Animal Farm. Many of you have probably read that as well. Animal Farm was published a couple of years before 1984. But anyway, so it comes out in 1949. This is just as the Cold War is kind of taking shape. I think it's important for us to understand that when we're looking at these novels. Anyway, so George Orwell, British author. That is where we're going to start. What's next? Brave New World. Now, why are we reading Brave New World next? Well, I would say that behind 1984, the next novel that people may be familiar with in this genre is Brave New World. And there's a reason for that. So, published by Aldous Huxley. Many of you are probably familiar with Aldous Huxley and his background. I'm not going to talk about that here, but has some other prominent members of his family that were, involved in various important things that we will discuss in the course. Now, this novel was published prior to 1984. So Brave New World was published in 1932. Aldous Huxley did know George Orwell. Huxley's a little bit older than Orwell, but he did know him. The title, Brave New World, is actually taken from Shakespeare. It is taken from the play The Tempest, interestingly enough. And Brave New World, like I said, a lot of people are probably familiar with it. And there is a certain common area between what Orwell posits in 1984 and what Huxley posits in Brave New World. But there are significant differences in the picture that they each create. So as many people have said, hey, there are different ways in which each of them kind of creates this potential vision of the future. But as we read those two novels first, it allows us to kind of create this more general mosaic to say, hey, here's what Orwell says, and here's what Huxley says. And while there's certainly some overlap between the two, there are some stark differences. So now we have this comparison that we can then use, and we can start to analyze, well, what do we see around us nowadays in the world that we live in, and what seems to be a little bit more similar to what maybe Orwell said, or what is maybe a little bit more similar to what Huxley said. Because I will tell you, a lot of people out there, when they use the term Orwellian, they just use it in this overly broad way, and they could actually be referring to something that may actually be maybe closer to something that Huxley, that Huxley put in Brave New World, as opposed to something that's actually in 1984, and that would just be just the result of people just using the term Orwellian in a very broad way, and perhaps not necessarily knowing what Orwell has said in 1984 or even in Animal Farm. Okay. These books those two are very psychological, though in different ways. And again, if all you know about 1984 is Big Brother, then there's a lot more you can take from the novel. If all you know about Brave New World is Soma, then there's a lot more that you can take from the novel, right? Okay, all right, let's go on. Ray Bradbury. So this book, published in 1953. So of the four works of fiction that we are going to read, this one was published last. Now, the two previous authors, both British, Ray Bradbury's American, books published in 1953. So a couple of years after 1984, this would have been basically as the hostilities of the Korean War would be ending. The armistice was signed in July of 1953. This would come out a couple of months later, but that's kind of what's happening in the world at the time that this novel is written. Now, again, a lot of people are familiar with this novel. People may have even read it in the past, but there are plenty of other people that haven't read the novel. Though it is very well known, maybe not quite as well known as 1984 Brave New World, which is why we're reading those first. But this is also very well known. And does it have some similarities with the first two? Of course, but it also has some differences. Now, many of you are probably aware that the title Fahrenheit 451 is a reference to the supposed temperature at which paper burns. In other words, I mean, it's a clear reference to book burning. Now, some people quibble. They say, "Hey, that's not accurate. That's not actually the temperature at which paper burns." Cool. Not the point. We can quibble about that, but not necessarily the point. Um, but again, if you're familiar with this book, but all you understand about it is book burning or censorship, and if you update that to kind of our context today, being removed from some sort of digital platform or fact checking or whatever. If that's all you take from this book, that's kind of a high school level understanding of the book. So let's look into it a little bit more deeply, because there's a lot more that can be taken from Fahrenheit 451 than just kind of this idea of book burning, even if we update it to a more contemporary context of what that would mean kind of in the digital era. There's a lot more going on in this book. The protagonist of this book is, of course, Guy Montag. Many of you may be familiar with that. I will also tell you on a personal note, of the four works of fiction that we're going to read, this one is actually my personal favorite, just kind of from readability and just the story itself. I'm a really big fan of Fahrenheit 451. Now, the next one. This one is one that people in the West are a lot less familiar with, which is one of the major reasons that we're going to read it. So this is a novel that is called We, as in W-E, We. The author is Yevgeny Zamyatin, and this is a Russian novel. Like I said, a lot of people in the West may be unfamiliar with this one, but it's a cool book. Okay, like I said, it's called We. It has a really interesting publication history. So, the book was written very early in the Soviet era. So it was written between about 1920 and 1921. So what's going on? So a lot of people think of the Bolshevik Revolution as occurring in 1917, but that's really when it started. The broader, kind of Russian Revolution actually lasts for several years, right? So anyway, but in that time period, between 1920 and 1921, this is the time period in which Zamyatin wrote We. Now, interestingly enough, this novel has the distinction of being the first work censored by the Soviet Censorship Bureau. So how did it get published? I'll tell you in just a moment, but let me insert here a quick aside. Some of you have probably heard of the term samizdat. If you have, there's another term that is less well known, that is called tamizdat, with a T, right? At least in English, a T, So what are those? So samizdat, in just very generally, what it means is it kind of refers to an underground publication, or like a secret publication of a book or whatever, a manuscript or whatever, a letter, and then secret distribution. So secret publication, which could be copying by hand, and then distribution so that people can kind of read it, but all of that is kind of done, secretly. Tamizdat is a similar concept, but what it means is it would generally refer to, by the way, these are Russian words. It would generally refer to something that could not be published in the Soviet Union, and therefore the manuscript would be smuggled externally. That would generally mean to the West so that it could be published. And then often after it's published, copies would be smuggled back in, and those would be secretly distributed. So both of them kind of refer to these underground techniques of ensuring readership of banned or censored material. But samizdat refers to something that is where this is done inside the Soviet Union. And then tamizdat refers to kind of taking a manuscript out somewhere else. It would then be externally published, probably in the West, and then copies might be smuggled back in. Okay, so the reason I say that is because We is an example of both. So we, like I said, written in 1920, 1921, it's first published in 1924, but it can't be published in the Soviet Union. Remember, I did say it has the distinction of being the first work that was censored by the Soviets, by the Censorship Bureau. So it was smuggled out, it was actually published in 1924 in New York, published in English, right? A couple of years later, so it had to be translated in order to be published. A couple of years later in Paris, there would be an unauthorized Russian publication. Now, what do I mean unauthorized? Meaning that the author, Yevgeny Zamyatin, um, was not even initially aware of this publication and did not authorize it. Okay, now years later, in the 50s, in 1952 specifically, it would be published in Russian in the Soviet Union, but kind of done in secret. It would not be openly, officially published in the Soviet Union in Russian, obviously, until 1988. This would be during the era of Glasnost, and at that point, it was allowed to be published. So, like I said, kind of a crazy publication history when it comes to the novel Weed. All right, so what should we know about Weed? Well, some people would call this. Remember, this predates Brave New World by about a decade, right? Almost a decade, roughly a decade, depending on if you're talking about when it was written or when it was first published in English. But it predates um, 1984 by about 25 years, right? Here's the other thing. A lot of people in the West were not very familiar with this work, even after it had been published in English. But some people certainly were. George Orwell was. And George Orwell freely said that his novel 1984 was influenced by We. Now, a lot of people don't necessarily know that. Okay. But if you read We, you will see the very clear similarities between that novel and 1984. Now, who else may have been influenced by We? Well, Aldous Huxley. In fact, Orwell said, hey, Orwell freely tells us he was influenced by this novel. He also says Aldous Huxley was influenced by it. Aldous Huxley refuted that. He said that he did not learn of the novel We until after Brave New World had been written and published. Whatever. Maybe that's true. Maybe it's not. But we definitely know that it influenced 1984 because Orwell tells us. So what is We about? Why is it so interesting? So We posits a society in which you have a collectivized state that is known as one state. That's what it's called, one state. And one state operates along the principles of mathematical optimization, to put it that way. So the whole society is kind of regimented in a way in which you kind of quantify the greatest good. Some people, this might resonate with some people who are kind of familiar with some of the tenets of utilitarianism, et cetera. And in fact, in this society, in one state, your daily regimen is dictated by a table that breaks down what you're going to do, every hour of the day, right? And our protagonist in the story doesn't even have a name. He goes by so everyone, they don't have names, the members of this society. They have basically a system of numbers and letters. And so the protagonist goes by the name D503. Okay, D503. Well, D503 is an engineer that is working to build a spaceship. Okay, that's what he does. Now, remember, this is a novel that's 100 years old. But you can kind of understand some of the philosophical questions that might arise in a novel that depicts a society that runs on math. Okay, now let's update that by a century, and let's think about things that we hear about today, right? Imagine a society, and it shouldn't be that hard for you to imagine this. Imagine a society that seeks to be optimized via algorithms. Okay, because that's the thing. People are talking about that, right? Um, we mentioned the term scientific dictatorship before. So a regime that seeks to become optimized by following science. Well, who interprets the science? I mean, that's the question. Okay, so anyway, what in a society like that? Well, what kind of arises philosophically? Well, what about all the variables in this society that can't necessarily be quantified? And we this is a guy writing in the very early 20s. He's clearly influenced by earlier Russian writers such as Dostoevsky. That's clearly apparent, in this novel. We'll talk a little bit about that. But anyway, this is a great book. A lot of people are not familiar with it. Um, like I said, it is very influential in ways that a lot of people have not necessarily recognized, which is unfortunate. Um, but we should read it because there are a lot of things in this 100-year-old novel that if we kind of update them contextually in our minds, um, perhaps give us some insights that we could apply to the world that we live in now. Okay. So the last thing that we are going to read is this book here. So this is not a work of fiction, right? It's a work of nonfiction. Okay. This is by author David Hughes. This book was just written very recently, as opposed to these other books of dystopian fiction that are a little older. But this was written very recently, and it's so in 2024, and it's called COVID-19: Psychological Operations and the War for Technocracy. Now, I will tell you, I struggled a lot. I've taught this course before. We did not read this book when I first taught this course 2 years ago because it hadn't been written yet. So when I was thinking about, all right, when I do the course this time, what do I want to read? And as I'm thinking about what we're going to read, of course, I'm also deciding what we're not going to read. I mean, you got to make some hard selections. I've had people who have asked me, are we going to read this? Are we going to read this? We can't read everything. I did want to read some of the classics, but this time I wanted to read a nonfiction book. I wanted to read these classic works of dystopian fiction and then supplement that by bringing in a work of nonfiction that I thought may really help us to kind of understand in some overarching way the technocracy and the elements of technocracy that we could potentially be facing right now. And so there were a couple of books that I was really struggling to try and figure out, okay, which one do I think we should read, because we can't read everything. Now, this is a pretty expansive book, and I don't mean that it's just long. I mean that there is a lot in this, okay? But I do think that we're going to take a lot from this. I've always been impressed every time I've heard David Hughes when he has given interviews recently. I think I first came across him about a year ago when he was participating in conferences or giving interviews about this idea of what he would call omni-war. And that kind of resonated with me. So that's how I kind of came to be familiar with some of his work. I have another book by his, but this is the one that we're going to read because I kind of want to take what we read in the other books and then put it into a very contemporary context to help us understand, hey, are there some indicators that we should look out for that may show us that we are headed into some sort of successive phases of technocracy? Now, I will tell you, I do think that's happening. But what exactly does that mean? What are these indicators? And what can we do? Because in this course, we want to be action oriented. Well, to be action, like I said, this is a book club for people of action. Well, to be action oriented, you got to be solution oriented. Otherwise, what are your actions? So these imagined creative solutions should then drive the actions that we take. But in order to have solutions that make sense, we got to have some sort of kind of strategic assessment of what is going on. And to have that strategic assessment, well, we got to be able to understand exactly what is happening. So that's kind of my idea of this course. In the previous course, we didn't read any nonfiction. In this one, we are. We got rid of some of the other texts and we inserted this one. So I'm really looking forward to reading this along with the other books too. And I do think it will help us kind of understand. All right, there are things that are happening right now, and with the insights that I took from Orwell or that I took from, Huxley or Zamyatin, and and then looking at it in a contemporary context, I can see that we're kind of headed along this same route. Or I have considered some of these options, or I have entertained some of these questions in my mind before, and now I just have a broader appreciation for maybe what we're seeing. That's kind of what I want to happen in the minds of the students and in my own mind as we go through this course. So anyway, all right, so that kind of sums it up. That is the course in a nutshell. Those are the books that we are going to go through. Like I said, the classes will be very informal. I do have it scheduled right now for about 20 classes. So classes will run weekly. Like I said, Tuesdays, 7 p.m. Eastern, starting on September 23rd. So here in a couple of weeks, a little over 3 weeks from now. And it's going to run for 20 lessons. And if you go to the website, you'll be able to see kind of the syllabus where I break it down. But basically, the curriculum is we're going to do a little bit of prep the first couple of classes, and then we're going to go through and we're going to read these books. So I hope that you will think about signing up for the class. I hope that you will think about doing the reading, but even if you just want to come and you just want to participate in the discussions and you're not interested in doing the reading, or you don't have time or whatever, listen, I get it. I still want you to come and be a part of the course. Or maybe you say, hey, I can listen to the audio versions of the books. Cool, great. I'm a print book fan myself. That doesn't mean that I never listen to audio versions of books, but at the end of the day, consuming the material is more important than not consuming the material, right? It's better than not consuming the material. So if you have any questions, you can drop them down below in the comments. Like I said, I will put a link to IPAC EDU in the description. I'll put a link to the registration page for this specific course. And I hope to see you on September 23rd. Thank you.